Today on In Good Faith, we're speaking with Mary Lahaj. She currently lives in Lowell, Massachusetts, where she's speaking to us from. Mary, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Mary works as a professional freelance writer for a prominent law firm in Boston, and over the years, she has reimagined religion. That's what we're going to talk about, not as an organized institution, but as an open question. I really like this approach. And she has a book, Bird on a Wire, where she makes a compelling case for readers to do the same. Mary, I want to start with just asking, where does that phrase bird on a wire come from?
It came from my grandfather and to him from his mother, which he told me when I interviewed him. And we would be driving in the car, and he would point to the telephone line and where birds would be lined up on the telephone line. And he would say, "See that? They're lining up for prayer," which is the way people, Muslims pray. They line up. And he believed that everything worships God.
Well, your grandparents were not just believers, but they worked at it. I read that your grandparents helped found the oldest mosque in New England. Tell me about that and what you remember about that growing up.
Well, it was a 30-year struggle for my grandparents. You see, my grandparents were the first immigrant generation. They came from Lebanon in this country, and then my parents were born here, and and then this idea of building a mosque when there was none was had to be done by both generations, my grandparents and my parents, who eventually married, grew up, and had families of their own. It was 30 years that it took to build this mosque, and I did the history of the building of the mosque for my master's degree in Islam and Christian Muslim relations
Mm.
at the Hartford Seminary, which is now Hartford International University. And that's when all of the research was done. And I that was like 1992, but it it took them so long to raise money, and really, it was the Christians and Jews who were their neighbors who contributed to this funding this building. uh, and it was built in 1964. And I was just getting ready to leave for college. And my mother said, "No, you could go to the mosque now." And I said, "Well, who's going to be there?" Like, you see, I didn't grow up with a mosque.
Mm.
I didn't even know the name of this religion. Uh, I, I, uh, I had no idea what a mosque was for. So she said, "Well," I said, Can are my friends going to be there?" They were all Christians and Muslims, Christians and Jews. I mean, I lived in Weymouth, Massachusetts, which is a blue collar town south of Boston. That's where I grew up. And she said, "No, your friends are not going to be there." And I said, "Well, then I'm not going." So, what did I think of it? I thought nothing of it.
Mm.
And I left for the next 30 years. And so it was, actually the next 20 years. I came back in 1984. So it was finally built in 1964. And I came back in 1984. And my aunt was see, I knew I was related to almost all of the families that were founding the mosque. There were 8 Muslim families in Quincy, Massachusetts, in a neighborhood, and that's where they met. My parents met. That's where they built the mosque, and uh, I, ca- I was related to almost all of the founding families, and my aunt was the secretary in the office. And when I returned after 20 years she said, I think I'll retire and you can have my job, which was so typical of my favorite aunt. And so I started working at the mosque. I still had no idea what this religion was about. And there were about 800 families there
Wow.
from at least 25 or 26 different countries. And I was a cheerleader for Weymouth High School, and I had no idea who these people were or what their values were or anything. But I learned from them. I learned they actually embraced me because of my family, not because they knew me. But they would come into the office and say, thank God you built this mosque. We're so happy. And I'd be like, okay. Uh, just because my grandfather, Muhammad Omar, was the imam. He was the first imam, and he from 1964 till 1984 or 1982. So,
Well, you had,
uh,
I would call it a ring. Of course, this sounds like a battle, but definitely ringside seat to religious life and faith life for all of those different families and the happenings. And what was it, though, that caused you to actually embrace Islam at some point?
well, I I have to say that I am a wounded healer. If you know what that is,
Yeah. I think it was
I
Henry Nouwen's
experience.
expression.
Yeah, that's right. And I was called to write about my life because you know I um, it was it was based on my experience of and bearing witness and my universal love of God. And there came a point when life was so difficult for me uh, during those 20 years that I had turned to God after not really thinking about God for 20 years or more. And then I needed to talk to someone about this big turning point in my life. And I did talk to my grandfather. And can I read from my
Please,
book
please
this
do.
one page?
Tell,
I
tell,
think you'll like
and tell us
it.
what page it's from as you read it.
It's page 165. I was driving my grandfather home, and I wanted to ask him about, well, meanwhile, I still know nothing about this religion, but I was pregnant and not married,
Mm.
and I wanted to ask him about, what I should do. So I didn't say it was me because I didn't want to disappoint him. I said it was my friend, but he immediately knew what I was talking about. Now, my grandfather, Jiddu, we call him in Arabic, he never ever judged anyone. So I wasn't afraid. I just didn't want to disappoint him. And we sat in the parking lot of the building where he lived. And he turned to me and he said something I will never forget. Shaking his head and scrunching his face, he asked, what kind of life, Mary? What kind of life? Now, he had limited English, but I knew what he meant.
Mm.
What kind of life had I been living that led me here to this moment? So when I returned home, uh, I I went right to my bedroom. I was living with my mother. I was 34 years old, and I did not tell her my condition. Um, I rushed upstairs to my bedroom. I had a bad case of self-doubt and no one really to turn to for further advice. So I sat on the floor and looked up at the high ceiling, desperate to connect to the higher power. I remembered two verses of the prayer Jiddu had taught me a long time ago when I was a child. It goes, "You do we worship, and you do we ask for help." Hmm. "Oh my God," I whispered, "would you hear me if I asked for your help?" I reflected on how I lived my life, self-centered, irresponsible. I wanted to change, but even if I could change, who would I be? Can I be better? I wondered. My neck was getting stiff from staring up at the ceiling. See, I didn't know how to pray. I sobbed and sniffled, and I adjusted my legs on the floor, and I just cried. While I was I asking for the impossible? And who would listen to such a request? Maybe there was no God, or maybe my life was an irredeemable mistake, and I was complete and utter an irredeemable mistake. Maybe God would slam the door in my face or ask me for a pound of flesh to pay for my lifetime of mistakes. Well, I cried out from the depths of my soul, "Please hear me. I want to do an impossible thing, but I can't, not without your help." And that was the last prayer I could think of. There were no more words or tears, and I passed my hand over my face to wipe the tears. Remarkably, nothing had changed. Uh, but after a while, I felt better. I cannot say how or why or what, but I felt that something deep within me had shifted. It was not based on reason or logic, but of a feeling of reassurance that overcame me. When I stood up in the middle of the room and stretched my legs, I had the strangest idea. I thought I could barter with God, and I whispered to no one in particular, "I'm going to have this baby, and you are going to help me."
Mm.
Hmm.
But you somehow felt that things were all right then, it sounds like.
Yes, I was able to make an important decision. And this is the book. My book really was written in retrospect, and it showed how God always showed up after I turned to God. It showed up. He showed up in the one person, or this person, or that person. But this God consciousness that I was alerted to, it has a name in Arabic called taqwa. And in the Bible, it's the same. It's the ability to be consciously aware of a higher power and in your life, and it is alert of to it as in every moment of your life, but watching for it,
Yeah.
I think,
And that almost
is
feels
what
like
you do when you become conscious of it. Yeah.
that feels almost like a spiritual gift to be able to learn to recognize that and to feel that as it happens.
Yes. Yes.
Did you know from that time that did you feel that God was with you? However, whatever path you took, or did you feel guided, or at least that there was an awareness that God had about you?
Well, as I said, in retrospect, I experienced it every step of the way.
Mm.
I'm not someone who has a 5-year plan for my life, or not even a 1-year plan. I just watched and waited and prayed uh, for help, as I said, and God God showed up. All I did was turn to God. That was all I did. And the idea of rethinking religion or faith in my life did start then, um, and but it was a long journey, and eventually I developed a practice that and a theology, and I recognized how my faith evolved over time from that time, which was 1982, until now.
So I think it's interesting that you went to what was then the Hartford Seminary, and what motivated you to choose an institution of learning like that rather than a completely secular college?
Well, I was at the mosque in the secretary's office, and the brochure from the Hartford Seminary landed on my desk. And I was part of a community where there was no way for me to learn about this religion. I couldn't sit with the kindergarten kids to learn. I didn't know anything. There was no, college that I knew of where they were teaching you about Islam. But the Hartford Seminary had this master's degree program in Christian Muslim relations. They had 12 courses on everything, everything you could ever want to know. And when I went there in my first class with Dr. Willem Bielefeld, a Protestant, he said, faith is, gosh, I better get this right. Faith in its ultimate extension is not the affirmation of truth. Faith is a lifetime of gratitude.
Interesting.
And that resonated with me because everything that happened to me once I reached out to God was beautiful. My son's father was the best father that ever lived. He provided for us. He spent more time with his son than most fathers probably do. He was just a beautiful person who uh, knew how to love and how to discipline and how to teach. And I guess finding this brochure on my desk, and getting the job at the mosque, and then finding the brochure on my desk was just these things that kept showing up. This was my living into my faith life.
So you go on to become
Yeah.
a chaplain on a hospital staff. So you've grown up with Christian and Jewish friends. You're meeting all of these Muslim families at the mosque where you're working. So what is it that it seems like you feel a sense of mission about uniting people of faith in spite of denominational differences?
That's right. That I wanted to I wanted to persuade everyone to join an interfaith group and to actually launch an interfaith uh, movement in this country. Why? So that we can share the things, recognize and share the things that we have in common.
Mm.
Then there's so many things. And that the idea that we will be united in this very divided country, especially today, I I viewed a lot of the ideas of organized religion today as being very divisive, not unifying. And my universal love of God, I know I share that with people. I know I do. And why not? Why not? Uh, you know, get together and learn from each other. Like it's affirming of your own faith when you meet someone of another faith, and it's important to know another person's faith. It says that right in the Quran. We made you into different nations and tribes, not to despise each other, but to get to know each other.
Mm.
That's a famous verse in
Yeah.
the Quran.
So I
I
wonder if you have an
paraphrase.
experience or two where you were able, as a chaplain, to help or minister to people of other faiths.
Oh, we were trained as multi-faith chaplains. So we were assigned floors and sections of the hospital. This was a big, big acute care hospital in Boston, Brigham and Women's Hospital. The name has changed now too. But so, uh, you know, I had never, there's no word for chaplain in Arabic, Farsi, or Urdu, the three main Islamic languages. So I was the first Muslim chaplain, and I wasn't able to study that at the seminary, even though later years, they did come up with a whole program for teaching Islamic chaplaincy. Well, I was out there, and uh, I didn't, I was sort of making it up as I went along, actually. There, so, not having been treated by a chaplain, or I, and not having any other role models, I was making it up. But I did have this wonderful experience. I had to get I was in the hospital for a brief time, a personal, uh, in, problem. And my friend, a Methodist minister, he came to see me, and I said, I am not thinking about God. All I can think about is that I had major surgery and I'm never going to recover. And I just don't know. I'm just horrible. I'm just a mess. And he said, maybe you need to think of new ways to connect with God. And that is what happened when I was a chaplain. Every situation that I went to, which was usually critical and heartbreaking oftentimes, every situation, I had to learn how to reconnect with God right there,
Mm.
and that it because it would be appropriate for the situation. And I just loved that. Was my favorite part, really, was being able to evaluate the situation and then find a way to connect with God. And even if it was just um, gi- giving someone a Kleenex or water, or, you know,
You're
uh,
still serving then.
it was quite an adventure. It was a spiritual adventure, I would say.
So now, after those years of not knowing what that faith was, even though your family grew up in it, do you feel connected to the greater Muslim community or the local community?
There are so many mosques now and so many communities. And um, I have been around a long time. I am a member of several of the mosques, Islamic centers. But for more than 10 years, the Islamic Center in Quincy, called the Islamic Center of New England, that my family helped found, was the only mosque.
Mm.
And all of the people who came there, they eventually uh, b- learned how to do it, and then they went back to their neighborhoods in other parts of Massachusetts. I mean, it this was the only mosque in New England, which is a six-state region, six states. So people came from Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and they eventually went back and built their own mosques. So now, I've been a member of the community for at least 40 years now. I taught religion at one of the mosques where I still am a member. And of course, I'm a lifetime member of the Quincy Mosque, but I moved away from Quincy, so I'm at another mosque. And uh, the the idea that you could just go to any mosque on any corner. I don't know how many mosques there are now in this country. Oh, well, probably close to 2,000, if not more. People just seem to take it for granted
Mm.
that they, oh, we go to the mosque. So I felt like I needed to tell the history of the mosque for the sake of this community so that they would have a greater appreciation for what it's like to come, to grow up without a mosque, without a school, without a religion. And they do appreciate it. When I was the secretary, and people would come to me and they would say, "Oh, thank you. We're so happy to have a mosque." Those people, right? Because it was the only mosque. Well, I started to see my grandparents' accomplishments through their eyes, and I saw that I had a legacy, and I that is that is what drew me into the religion itself, wanting to learn more. You come to religion through fear, love, knowledge. I came through fear. I evolved to learn and gained knowledge, and ultimately I just love God, and uh, I, I I love the community. I love how this religion changed my life. And I don't like to say religion because, to tell you the truth, Steve, I don't think of it as a religion.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. And the reason for that is because there are at least 50 Muslim majority countries in the world, and they're all about culture. And I know this show is about culture. You know, uh, if you're driving a car, culture is the person driving. Religion is riding gunshot. That you will always be under the domination of your culture. And the people I met from all these different countries, like I said, I was a cheerleader for Weymouth High School. What do I know about this religion? Well, I had to make it my own.
Uh-huh.
You know, Woodrow Wilson said, religion is an individual matter, and the source is the heart. Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, so it was difficult to relate to the community after 9/11, but before that, they embraced me and I embraced them. And but as I evolved, as my culture became more dominant, I wore the head cover for like 9 years.
Mm.
And then I took it off because I didn't feel like it was really, I didn't feel sincere about wearing it anymore. It's different when you grow up in a culture where you're supposed to wear it,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't feel authentic after a while wearing the head cover. At first I did. At first, it was part of my journey to find my identity, my ethnic and religious identity, and I embraced it. I was very zealous, but after a while, I saw that again. I think culture kind of takes over, and this I don't think that I my practice is developed by it's informed by Islam. It's informed by other practices in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Judaism, uh, and all of them. Um, Let me just say this: the word for religion in Arabic, every time it's mentioned, is is the word way in English. So the Sunnah is the Prophet's way. Sharia is the way uh, to the halal, to everything that's good. The Deen, your Deen is the way to your um, to your to your consciousness. So the way is a very common term among all different faiths
Right.
and ways of life, and that's what I think. That's the basis of my practice. Now, um, uh, yeah,
Thank you. No, that's great. I have a few final questions. Do you still have a few minutes?
yes, I
Oh,
do.
wonderful. Okay. Have you had the chance to or felt motivated to do the Hajj?
Yes, I did do the Hajj.
Can you tell me
I
about your
did, and
experience?
yes, it was. The Hajj is no picnic. I'll tell you right now. And you will find ask any Muslim who's made the Hajj, they will say the same thing.
Mm,
You know, millions and millions of people descend on a small area, and they crush and crowd you. And it's very physically challenging. And I I didn't grow up hoping my whole life to make the Hajj. I never even heard of it till I was 45 years old.
mm,
But the people who were there, who were hopping on one leg around the Kaaba, no, that's what they did. So what happened was, I went with a group from Boston of 25 men and women, and you can go to the Hajj from the United States. You don't have to wait a second. But if you're from a country like Indonesia, where there are over 200 million Muslims, you have to wait for years
right,
before you
right.
go. Anyway, we were approaching what is now, I think it's happening today on the Hajj, this Mount Arafat, where you go and you're supposed to before every ritual, our guide and our imam would gather us together and explain what we were going to do the next day, why we were going to do it. So he was explaining that what we were supposed to do for this big important ritual, spend from sunrise to sunset at Mount Arafat and ask for forgiveness for all your sins. Hmm. Wow. While we were sitting there the night before, I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, Imam, I I don't believe that God is gonna forgive me for my sins. I'm not I'm not able to comprehend that." And he said, "Well, that's why we are all here in Mecca, to ask God's forgiveness." And I said, "Okay." And he said, if your child did something wrong, would you not forgive him? And I'm like, "No, okay, yeah, I can get that." But I still wasn't convinced till he said this. He said, "Mary, the only reason that you think God won't forgive you is because you know what you did. This is uh, this is important part of your mind. You know, you can't forgive yourself,
Mm.
but you're not God." No. And it was an important lesson of the importance of forgiveness, of the importance of forgiving yourself. And I mean, even the psychology of where Catholics go in to confession.
Right.
Sure, once they finish, they've acknowledged that they were wrong and they've asked for forgiveness. And if you believe in God, you will forgive yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful insight. Kind of one of the
Mm.
necessities that we have to experience for ourselves. I also read, if you have a moment, that you're an accomplished musician, and I'm wondering, has music shaped or affected or is related to your faith?
That is the hardest question. All I can tell you is that music is my first love.
Mm.
And when you hear music or and you feel that you want to cry, you know that you have a soul.
Ah,
And you're like, "Oh, what's going on in there?" That's your soul crying out. And music just takes me right there. Music and now prayer.
and maybe you've answered some of this, but finally, I'd like to ask, you've been on this lifelong journey, a spiritual journey, and learning along the way, and then being able to bless others along the way, which I think is beautiful. Um, what do you know now about God that you didn't know back then? What have you learned? And how do you see God working in your life?
Uh, I have a universal love of God. I think that people need to humanize their religion and their faith. I have lived into my faith, and as I said, I let's see, let me think about this for a minute.
Sure, take your
I
time.
guess I guess that um, if if there's something I don't want to do, but I I know it is offered to me. For example, chemotherapy after cancer. No one wants to do chemotherapy, but um, one of my sisters in Islam said to me, "If God asked you to do something, would you say no?"
Mm.
No. So that's it. I can never say no to Allah. And Allah, as I've been referring to God in Arabic, I want to make sure this is clear. That it means the one worthy of worship. And that I leave to your open mind and your open question about faith and religion. And I feel I am never alone. I feel connected with Allah, and I mean, a lot of people do complain about loneliness. I guess I can say, to answer your question, I am never alone.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Mary Lahaj lives in Lowell, Massachusetts. She works as a professional freelance writer for a prominent law firm in Boston. We've been talking about her journey, which is outlined in her book, Bird on a Wire. Mary, thank you so much for speaking with me in good faith
Oh,
today.
thank you, Steve. You've been just so great. Thank you. And thank you to the audience that's listening.